So I'm going to go ahead on and get started. It's about 2:45, and I know we only got about an hour, and so I want to make sure that we maximize our time. So good afternoon. I'm Ron Kirkland. I'm the facilitator for this afternoon, and thank you so much for attending this important session on understanding men's mental health from the African American perspective, okay? And what I'd like to do, I would normally introduce the panel members, but we've talked before, so for time, I'm going to give each one of them 1 minute to do an introduction of themselves. Okay, so Jeff, first.
I won't need a minute. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you. Good to be in this space with you. My name is Jeff May, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Administrative Officer for the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum. Long name. We just say SACAM. In that role, I work with a lot of people. And when you work with people, you work with their trauma. And in working with trauma, sometimes you have to approach your own. So for me, being people-centered, being concerned with people, I have to also keep myself in mind, right? And come face to face with my own reality. So for me, being a people-centered leader means I'm also self-aware. And as I become more self-aware, you kind of realize there's some things you got to continue to work on. You got to continue to see about. You have to continue to approach and face. So with all of that, I say good afternoon.
Roy, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Roy Sowell III. I am a YMCA mental health counselor, a licensed professional counselor associate, and I'm also a retired vet. I have the opportunity to not only provide therapy to our community members, but also do mental health presentations to seniors, to youth, to schools, and to also partnering businesses that we work with. So don't need a minute to actually do a presentation, but it's definitely been a rewarding career so far. I don't even feel like I'm working. Most times it's a passion, because not only am I able to help those in their journey, it also encouraged me to continue with my own journey. You know, a lot of times I don't do this because I want to collect a check or whatnot. I do it because it's actually who I am. I live it. You know, I'm someone that's actually been going through the healing process myself, and I can actually talk to that. So I don't only model it, but I live by example.
Dan.
My name is Dan White, and I'm a retired clinical social worker with the Veterans Administration. I'm also a minister at E.T. Dixon United Methodist Church on Highway 60. I also am a facilitator for peer-to-peer, family-to-family, in your own word, and Homefront. And my whole focus is that the world has given me so much, and I am always trying to see what I can give back to help someone else.
Thank you. And I'm Ron Kirkland. My background, 33 years of military service. When I retired, I went back to school to get another advanced degree in clinical mental health. And so I pivoted once I retired, and now I'm here serving the community from the mental health side. So with that, let's get into it, and so we can maximize the time and leave time for you to ask questions, okay? So the first question for the entire panel, and we'll start from left to right, is what do you see some of the barriers for African American men in getting or seeking adequate mental health care?
For me, number one, it was me. It was me. It was how I was raised. It was what I thought about mental health. It was my toxic masculinity. It was me not being kind to myself. So it was me. Before it was anything or any system, I hindered myself and stood in my own way of some of the things that I needed. Even my viewpoint of what was really going on. Because sometimes we all know we can convince ourselves of something that's not really there. Am I right? Yes. And we can convince ourselves that we're okay and we're doing all right when it's the exact opposite. So for me, one of the biggest barriers, and sometimes continues to be my biggest struggle, is the person sitting right here.
Thank you.
A couple of barriers I see to start off with is buy-in. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we don't really buy into the thought that therapy or mental health is very important. We're so concerned with so much life, surviving, checking these other boxes that we don't really consider that mental health should be the most important thing we're considering, because without good mental health, actually your physical health and your spiritual health is going to suffer eventually. So it should be definitely at the forefront. Also stigmas, he kind of hit to that, the stigma that we are presented, whether it's self-inflicted or family or friends or community-inflicted. And I don't want to talk too much about stigmas because we may cover more about that later. But that's another one. And then cost, Unfortunately, cost is definitely another barrier within our community as far as seeking adequate mental health. But a lot of times people don't know also there are programs in place to assist with that. So those are some of the things I would say definitely are barriers to seeking adequate mental.
So, Roy, I want to follow up on the cost. As we were talking outside, one of the things that I did not know, and I've been asked this, is can you talk about the free mental health for teens and families?
Yeah. Yes, sir, for sure. All right, so a lot of people don't even know that the YMCA offers therapy to begin with. So with that being said, we definitely service youth 12 to 19, our seniors as well, 65 and older, and our vets. At this moment, they're all serviced for free.
That's right.
Anybody in between that, they're considered a paying client, and we do work on a sliding scale. So like a sliding scale basically based on your income that determines how much you may be expected to pay. Also, if we have a parent or parents that may be connected to that youth, then they can get counseling for free as well. So in other words, the family now is receiving free counseling rather than just the youth. So I know a lot of times, we make this pitch and we don't get much activity from it, but if you know someone that can use the service, please feel free to pass it on.
And I know when my brother gave me his card and he actually told me that, I know it's power in what black men say, right? It is power in what black men say, and we have to use our language very intently and intentionally. So when he gave me the card immediately, I think it was 10 seconds later, because I know a young lady who's going through a divorce and she sees the effects on her kids who are school-age children. And she also sees the effect on herself. And when his brother told me that the family gets it, you immediately do what you need to do. And her response to me, and I can show you my phone, well, because you recommended it, I'll do it.
Amen.
Because you recommended it, I'll do it. But again, if this brother hadn't, had that service and offered that service, so a lot of times our community will do and buy in if we're bought in. And we have to use our influence, we have to use our positions within our community effectively, because man, I don't know what that's gonna do for those babies. And I don't know what that's gonna do for that young lady, but I got an idea we're gonna break some generational curses in that family, right? Yeah.
Have a question, ma'am?
Yes, is that all the whys or just certain ones?
All right, well, let me specify, because obviously the why, we tend to work in what we call our inner cities. However, I'll name the ones that do provide that service, but you can reach out. In other words, we don't turn away anyone. But just to give you an idea, David Scott, that's located off of Iowa, right? West Side, that's located off of Ruiz, okay? We have Walsham, which is located off of Walsham, all right? We have Najum, Harvey Najum, that's located off of Roosevelt. And then we have the South Side, which is, I believe, located off of South Cross?
Yeah, you're on South Cross.
Okay, yeah, and that's one of my colleagues. So yes, those are the 5 core. However, if you don't fall within that range, still don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we'll see if we can make some accommodations, okay?
I say that because there's a lot of people off the Trinco area.
Yes, ma'am.
That need services.
Okay.
I know they do. Because what you just said, divorce, children.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a lot of that. So everywhere in Southern Toronto. So I was just, yeah.
And I would say also, if we run into a situation where we may not be able to provide services that way, I'll give you one of my cards and we can work something out. Because at the end of the day, it's about getting help. And like I said, costs tend to be the issue, right? And so, but Trinco, don't get me wrong, it kind of falls on a fine line to where this may sound, there's affordability there to where people can afford to pay, and then some may not be able to afford.
Well, these are young folks who have left home.
Okay. Oh, then yes.
Children kind of in the streets.
Okay.
That's everywhere. It's not just
Yes.
location.
Yes, ma'am.
And they're trying to find their way. And And so I know a couple of them that's like that. The family can't do anything, they out there lost.
So what we'll do is, we have to make sure that we link up with Roy afterwards, so he can give you the card as well, okay? So part of what we're doing here is, as we go through, and if an idea come up where we know there are resources, we're not going to wait until the end. We're going to talk about it now. And just to follow up to that as well is, I know at St. Mary's University, where I received my degree, there's also reduced counseling there, and you got to call the Family Life Center. And so based on your income and where you are, you still can get some counseling services there for a reduced cost. And I think some of the other universities around San Antonio does the same thing. But I know for sure at the Family Life Center at St. Mary's, for sure. Okay. Dan, please.
In answering your question, I found basically there are 4 barriers to black men getting mental health care. I found religion, I found culture, I found trust, and money. And I'm certain that as we go through this discussion, that we'll touch on those things as we go through. And so I won't prolong the answer at this point, but as we get in more heated discussions, I'll try to expound on those 4 things.
Okay, so I'll send the heat this way now, right on the follow-up, okay? So what do you think can be done individually and collectively to improve mental health outcomes for African-American men?
Well, I think you have to focus on education, because on a personal level, I had never heard of mental health until I was in college. Nobody in my family talked about mental health. The people in my community, they usually made fun and laughed at people who had mental illnesses, whether it was schizophrenia or paranoia, or whether it was even depression. We saw those people as being weak and unable to stand up like a man and address the issues in their life. I did not know that there was therapies and techniques that people had developed that address those issues in all people and not just black men. And so as I matriculated through college and graduate school, I began to learn some of those therapies, and I was trained and learned how to use some of the techniques such as CBT, such as rapid eye movement, a whole spectrum of different therapies that I never heard of until I got to college. That's right. So that's what we can do on an individual basis, but it's all going to start with education.
Roy, same question.
All right. Let's normalize the conversation about it. Right? A lot of times it's not normal. And again, it seems so distant, but it's just as normal as we would think about physical or spiritual health. You know, mental health, again, is part of that parameter as far as the triangle thing that's important. Mental, spiritual, and physical. So let's make it normal, right? In other words, don't shame people for wanting to seek help. You know, a lot of times families don't even realize that they shame their own family members sometimes for the things that they're going through. Why? For what? You think that's going to make them want to seek help? You think that's going to make them want to be vulnerable to you and open up to you about what they're experiencing? No. So we have to normalize the conversation. And also, like you said, with education, mental illnesses, mental disorders, and mental health are 3 different things, right? First of all, mental health is just what it is. It's the health of your mental mind state, nothing else. It has nothing to do with the illness or disorder, right? And then disorders are just improperly function. But it doesn't even require all the time, it doesn't take medication. Generally, an illness requires medication, right? And that's something that really is out of their control. For instance, bipolar schizophrenia, right? Those are 2 examples where depression, per se, it has a scale. You know, we can have mild depression all the way up to major depression. So major depression sometimes it requires medication, where mild, none. It's all about the perspective, and that's why you go to counseling and therapy, right? To help you change that perspective. So let's normalize these conversations. And first, think about the semantics as well. I'm big on semantics because words have power, right? And we have to be careful how we use our words. That's all I have to say.
I think Both of those brothers laid it out pretty clear. And for me, I can just speak from a personal standpoint, it was a mindset shift for me about what mental health meant, right? And maybe y'all didn't get raised in this kind of household, but what happens in this house, oh, y'all too, same address, right? Same address, right? Don't go outside of this house and tell people my business. Come on, somebody, right? So for me, I spent a long time as an educator and in schools. And for me, my success as an educator didn't come in the classroom. It came into those small rooms. Yeah. It was within those small rooms where those young people said, here's what's going on. And that was a big thing for them because they were raised under the same mantra I was raised under. Don't you let folks, we were taught how to be fake. We were taught how to put up a cool pose. We were taught how to shield ourselves, right? But I also know what happens in this house stays in this house, but it destroys everybody in the house. So that when you go and create your own home, you have now brought those same broken tools, and now you break children. Come on, somebody, right? And for me, with young men, we're always taught how to be tough. So another mindset shift is not just how we were raised, but how we viewed ourselves, right? What does manhood really mean? And I realized breakthrough with young men, particularly young men who were struggling with gang violence and court involvement, it wasn't me breaking them down with quotes and stats and force. It was a hug, straight up. A dap can turn into a hug all day long. It just depends on who's brave enough to keep that embrace. And when a young man looks back at you and you can tell him you love him and he doesn't fear that you want to take anything from him, that's that breakthrough. That's therapeutic in a way, right? But it's a mindset shift around masculinity. We're like, yo, I felt funny doing this at first, but I needed it. Right? I didn't know I needed another man to look me in the eye and say, I love you, I care about you. So I'm about to jump in your chest a little bit if I need to, but it's coming from a good place because I love you. And as educators, we always said, well, the teachers who were most successful had that pedagogy. They did the X's and the Q's. The people who can be transparent enough to say, here are the scars that heal for me, which gives you hope that the wounds, those open wounds that you come to school with can also heal too. So for me, it's a mindset shift in our families. It's a mindset shift within how society says what a man is or what a man isn't. And then it's also that acceptance, right? Whereas if I come home as a man and say, hey, I'm feeling this way, will you still respect me? Will you still feel safe? I'm gonna be honest with you. You can be with a stone cold killer who can really have a poker face, or you can be with somebody who said, today I'm not well. Today I'm hurting, and here's why. But as men, we were never in that habit of expressing ourselves in that way because we never always felt safe. Not an excuse for any behavior, but it's good to have a reason. It's good to have some context, right? Because again, I didn't see my dad do it. But now that I've become a man and I've had my own struggles, I don't blame my father. I don't excuse him either. But I love him even more as a man than my father. Does that make sense? It's a mindset shift.
I'd just like to add one thing to that, is that the eye-opener for me was when I went to the prison system. And I began to talk to guys in the prison, and most of them couldn't string together just a sentence, let alone a paragraph. Yeah. And most of them, when you sit down and would ask them, well, how do you write a letter to your family or your girlfriend or your wife? And I'd see some of those letters come back, and I would wonder how they got out of grade school. And they were very tough guys, but as I began to talk to them, so many of these people were hurting. I mean, emotionally inside and mentally drained. And so they tried to keep up a tough exterior to keep the other predators in the prison from attacking them. Sure. And so you had to break down that barrier first so they could see you as someone who loved them and wanted to be therapeutic toward them. And therefore they would let the guards down. And I've seen the tough guys, when I read their report, from the warden and what they've been accused of doing and how their attitude is and everything. And I would see them sit in the office now and start crying like a little baby because they didn't know which way to turn. They didn't know who to trust or how they could get help. And I think, you know, some of the programs that they're developing now, especially here in Bexar County, and in some of the other court systems here in Texas, and they're doing it in other states too, they're beginning to educate these people and to get them to trust someone so they can actually get the therapy that they need.
Right. And I think a lot of us are still walking around in those prisons.
Yeah.
Like this brother talked about the physical prison, right? But there's a prison that most men, most black men walk around in to protect ourselves from the predators, or AKA the threats. What are the threats? Judgment, society, racism, right? The unpleasing female gaze. Yeah. Now there's guys in the room like this. They ain't gonna shake their head too much because we a little outnumbered, right? But I'll be brave enough, brothers, to, you know, just,
The point
we okay, right? But at the same time, like, those are prisons, right? Because again, a prison keeps you in a box. A prison keeps you where you're supposed to be. Also, fear does too. Assumptions do too. Misunderstandings do too. So as you were speaking about the prison concept of how to protect yourself, you put up a shell, you put up a wall. I don't know how many ladies in here have dealt with gentlemen in their lives that have a wall up and they still got that wall up.
Yeah.
They still got that wall up. Well, I just wish you were more open. Well, I wish they were more safe. And it ain't got nothing to do with you. It can be everything they have come from. You can be the key and the tool, but because you never saw somebody appeal to the senses, then you don't know how to do it either. So now we have all these instructions, but no tools. But we're supposed to build a life together. Yikes, right? Maybe I'm in the wrong room. It's cool.
No, real quick, I'm sorry, Ron, real quick. The term emotional, you know, you hear that, you know, emotional, right? Well, men are emotional too, because we are human and we have emotions.
That's right.
So, in other words, don't say you're too emotional. That's the quickest way to shut down a man. However, just call it what it is. If you cry too much, tell him he's too sensitive, you know? And ask him why he's so sensitive. You know, in other words, because he could be experiencing something that's going on that he don't know how to get out, you know? But also that's judging, right? That's judging if we say he's too sensitive or we say he's too angry, he's too moody. But definitely don't call him emotional because he definitely has emotions, right? But if you say he's crying and you don't know why he's crying, ask him why he's crying. Ask him why he's angry. Ask him why he's moody. In other words, poke him. Poke him, because sometimes he's waiting for somebody to ask him why, right? Rather than being judged, right? So just ask him. That's it. That's the quickest way to start a conversation. That's it.
I had a good friend that just spoke to me maybe Saturday when I was in Baltimore, and he said, man, I don't know what to do. I woke up one day and sat on the edge of the bed and cried. And he said, my wife didn't know what to do. She just kind of pat me on the back, but didn't have any words. I could tell she didn't know what to do. I could tell from the pat. She didn't know what to do. And he said in that moment, I felt more alone. I felt more depressed. Because now here it is, I done wasted these tears in this space. And somebody doesn't know how to help me. Now he said it's 50-50. I need to have the words to be able to express it. But he said my wife didn't know how to react when my true self came out. Because I have to hold it together for everybody. But I woke up and I just sat on the edge of the bed and wept. You know, there's a difference between crying and weeping, right? His brother said he wept, like shoulder shake, like he was weeping. Snot flying, bubbles, yeah. But he said he could tell by the attempt to comfort him that she was at a loss. And for many of us, we don't even want to go there because we feel like we can't get that back. As soon as you see me in that moment, then I'll never get it back. Because when I try to flex on you, you're going to be like, no, remember when you was crying on the edge of the bed? Don't bring me that energy. Where's that weepy energy?
Don't try to be tough
You
now.
know, don't try to be tough now
Don't try
with
to be
it,
tough.
right? But at the same time, maybe that flexing is just another way that, you know, you thought it was, it's just somebody who's feeling stressed.
Stress ball.
I guess we hitting the nerves.
We're not stressing you out that much.
I think that's what we hit.
Can I touch on something very
Okay.
briefly, and then I'm going to stop? I have a nephew who's about 6 or 7 years old, and before he was born, his father left home saying he was going to go and find a job, and he's going to send back and get his wife and his kid. And about 50 years later, the kid found out where the father was in Florida and decided that he and I were going to go down and see the father. And on the Friday that I came home from the VA and was going to go to Florida with him, he came to the house and said, well, he's never looked me up, and I'm not going to look him up. And so the father eventually died about 10 years later, and I see that pattern with my nephew is that he has 4 kids and he's estranged away from them, and somebody has to be man or woman enough to break the curse.
For sure.
And so my prayer is, I've sent letters to his kids asking them to make that contact with the father. Somebody has to say, I'm going to be a big enough person to reach out to somebody else to let them know I care about them. And it may turn into love, and it just may be a casual relationship, but somebody has to take the first step.
Thank you so much.
You got to trust somebody.
That's right.
Thank you. So the next question, Jeff, I'm going to come to you. You got a great narrative, and I want you to talk a little bit about it in the toxic workplace. Can you speak about what made you really get ready to go and seek therapy?
Because I wasn't able to be there for the people that needed me the most. You know, I realized that I wasn't coming home and showing up at home the way I needed to. And you can feel that, right? Nobody has to tell you. And for me, I wasn't. I was in a toxic work situation, and it would be easy to blame microaggressions or hypervigilance, because that's 2 diagnoses that I got. Anxiety and depression because of hypervigilance and a toxic work environment with microaggressions and racism. 2 separate diagnoses, the same diagnoses, but 2 separate practitioners. And for me, I had to challenge myself, because I'm like, oh, those are titles. I'm not defined by that. Well, it happened again by a different doctor. And I said, okay, maybe something to that, but it's also how I was processing it, and I wasn't processing it in a healthy way. So I realized I wasn't myself. I wasn't living life. If my sleep is impacted and my reactions are impacted, and the people who are the closest to me are being impacted by how I show up and what I'm going through, I need to get some help. And for me, I also understood going through racism and going through microaggressions, either I could get into a ball and then I'm no good for the work world when I come out of it. I don't want to be around certain people. I didn't want to be around white people. Or I can realize that with just those people. Or I can realize that this is stuff that people in my culture have been going through for a long time. And those diagnoses aren't just about the job I came out of, but the journey that I'm coming through. And it was about my journey. And I'm thinking, yo, I'm gonna find me a counselor that looked like me and everything. Could not find one black counselor. I said, if I can't go black, I'll go brown. Let me find. Found one. Went through a whole hour, and he broke up with me. Straight up, said, it's not you, it's me. I said, I've never been broken up with. He said, I'm gonna refer one more person to you. And I said, I might give it a try. It was an older white man. And I said, you know what? I can't win. So I went and tried it. And me and that older white man have been together for 2 years, as it has been the most successful relationship that I've had in a very long time. You know why? Because I can't lie to him. I have to be totally transparent. And I knew for my trajectory and what I needed to do and how I needed to recover, I needed to tell my black truth to a white face and not flinch. So I'm working at SACAM, San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum, and our motto is to collect, preserve, and share African American history. I have to be able to tell this Black story, which is an American story, to people who want to erase it. And if I had trauma in that space, how can I do it with validity to where my ancestors and my grandmother would be proud? So a part of my recovery was every week in front of that white face to tell my truth. And you know what he did? He affirmed me. He said, absolutely, and you went through this and that and this and that. You're absolutely right. I needed to hear that. Now, some people, you need something else. But I knew what I needed because it was a futuristic kind of thing. Y'all feel me? Mm-hmm. I can't go and do this work I get a chance to do every day if I wasn't well and I wasn't whole. So a part of my recovery was leaning into my discomfort so that I don't shut the world out, but I can call the world in. It's easy to call people your enemy and call them out, but it takes some skill to call people to the table and call them in. Because how you gonna get anything done if you don't do it that way? So for me, that was my journey, that was my narrative in a nutshell, and he and I have an appointment or a date on Monday. Because again, I may not be going through those moments where I need him every week, and it cut down to every month, but how many people know your car still need maintenance every now and again? I don't need to be in a traumatic situation to check on me. You don't need the doctor to tell you to check your blood pressure. You should do that yourself, right? You shouldn't wait till the check engine light come on, but you should make sure that there's some regular maintenance on yourself. And just like I work out, I need to go work out. Y'all feel me? So yeah, that's my story.
A great story too, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to follow up with the other two panel members here. So what are some of the practices in the workplace that can lead to mental health challenges for African American men?
I want to say he just did a good job explaining most of that. But a lot of times it's just the rejection, you know, the microaggressions, the ability to feel, or I should say not the ability, but the unfortunate ability to feel isolated. And those all can be challenging aspects in the workplace. We have to sometimes we find our ways to include ourselves where we're not included. And we don't realize that that rejection is just another poke at a lot of things we've been through historically. So, in other words, that's why we need therapy. That's why we need community. That's why we need other men, you know, to share this story with. But also, what I like to speak to is that, and that's another aspect of this, but we also have to be the victor rather than always the victim. You know, it's hard for me a lot of times to sit up here and talk from a pessimistic view because I'm a very optimistic individual. So while we may meet those challenges and have those challenges in the workplace, we have to find a way to overcome, you know, as we do with anything else. But again, I would say the microaggressions, the rejection, and the isolation can be challenges in the workplace.
Thank you. Dan?
My situation was a bit different. I was in a system that rewarded me well, and for 20-some years, I would get a bonus every year, 5, 6, and I got as much as $9,000 in 1 year in the VA for bonuses. My colleagues, psychologists, psychiatrists, I worked on a team, and they were always praising me and giving me awards from the mental health section. And I thought I was a Superman until in 2003, my wife of 23 years was diagnosed with myocytic leukemia. And I was going to work every day, seeing patients and taking a lot of the drain off of my colleagues. And I thought things were going okay until one day my psychiatrist said, Dan, you don't look so good. And I told him I was okay. I was getting about 1 hour sleep a night. I go to the hospital at Emory and see my wife at night, and they'd give her blood transfusions, and she would be okay for a month or 2 months, and then we'd repeat the same process. And I thought I was doing okay until my nephew, who used to stay with me, and he never did meet his father in his whole life, and he told me, he said, "Unc, you don't look too good." And I said, "Why are people telling me this?" And he said, "We're telling you this because we love you." And he said, "Why don't you let me take you to the Cobb County Mental Health Center and see somebody there?" And I told him I didn't want to go and everything, and my director of the outpatient clinic in Chattanooga called me, and he and I were having a discussion, and she said, "Well, let me talk to your nephew." And I said, "Okay." So she told my nephew that all of the people that I work with on my team, they were concerned about me. And after he got off the phone with her, he said, "Unc, the people think that you're falling apart." And I agreed to let him take me to the mental health center. And I went there, and I was denying to the psychiatrist that anything was wrong. And he started to point out to me, he said, "Your wife is sick and dying. You're not sleeping but an hour each night. You're driving back and forth from Chattanooga to Emory here in Decatur. And it seems to me that you're doing more harm to your patients than you're doing good." And he said, "I'm going to admit you to the hospital unless you're going to have to fight it, but at least you're going to have to stay here 72 hours. And he gave me some medicine to help me sleep. And I went to sleep that night and slept probably 8 or 10 hours. I woke up the next day and I thought to myself, what am I doing here in the hospital? I'm the strong one. I'm the tough guy. And I've been treating people for over 20 years, and I just don't understand how I can fall apart all of a sudden." And the next day he called me in, and I was telling him what I was thinking. He said, "Sir, you didn't fall apart overnight. You've been falling apart for years. You just didn't acknowledge it. You're in denial." And so I agreed with him that I was going to stay in the hospital. And he saw me on an individual basis, and then he eventually, after about a month and a half, put me in a group. And I couldn't go see my wife, and I was worried about that and everything. And he said something to me that I had told patients numerous times. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. And he told me, say, you've got to listen to somebody other than all these voices that are going over and over in your head. And he told me, he said, my diagnosis is that you have major depression with psychosis and generalized anxiety. And so I agreed to let him give me some medicines for that. And progressively over about 3 months, because I had never known anybody to stay in the hospital at the VA for 3 months just for a mental illness. And I stayed there 3 whole months, and I could see I got better and better. And the bottom line is, he not only got me a therapist outside of the VA, but he put me on medication. And since 2005, I've been taking antidepressant. I've been going to see a therapist, and it has helped me get my priorities in order, because I had to learn how to take care of myself and accept the fact that I was a human being just like everybody else. And I needed to acknowledge that other people love me and wanted to help me. And once I began to do that, I've seen myself steadily improve. Last thing was, I thought I would never go back to practicing social work within the VA. I went back to work after 7 months and worked on up until my wife died in 2006, in March of 2006. And I finally retired in 2013, moved out here to San Antonio, eventually met a lady who's a psychiatrist and got married. And she and I have been married for 11 years now.
Very good story. So just following up on a few things here, I just want to add on. Burnout is real. And you just heard that story here, so it's real. The other thing, the other B that goes along with that, boundaries. So we got to establish boundaries. Okay, you're at work, be careful what you take on.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we're trying to establish ourselves, and sometimes it's very hard to say no. And when you, quite frankly, when you start getting a good job, like Grandma used to say, more people are putting bricks in your rucksack. No one else can see it, but you can feel it. And you,
Yes.
because the weight is getting heavier. So those two B's, burnout and boundaries, they're real. The other thing that I'll share with you is, who's that person you talk to, safe space? I call it no fingerprints, outside the workplace. Who can you talk to? Sometimes it's not your spouse because of some of the reasons that we talk to. Sometimes it's your best friend, sometimes it's your neighbor. But you have to establish who that person is. But you got to get yourself one. Because everybody needs to talk, because the person we listen to the most is ourselves. And if we're in a different state, then we're listening to maybe the wrong thing. Now, I like to tell people sometimes when you get into the depression or anxiety, you got to become a judge. You got to, because the prosecutor on this side of the brain is trying to say everything is going wrong with the depression. And that prosecutor also with the anxiety is saying, hey, you have no future. So what you got to do is hire yourself a defense attorney on this side and say, what evidence do I have that I am in this state?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just remember that. And we always talk about work-life balance, but in reality, sometimes that's difficult. And it all depends on where we are in life. And so sometimes it's difficult to achieve, but I still want to mention that. And then the other thing, just document things. Because if you have to go back and say that, you know, I experienced this, the first thing the HR or whoever's coming down to investigate is going to say, when did it happen? Do you have any proof of it? But also document good things that are going on. So when it comes back to your evaluation or anything, and folks try to say that you didn't do this, you have proof that you did it on this day. Okay. Just continue on here. After we talked about getting mental health, all three of you guys. After seeking and getting therapy and mental health services, two questions. How did your beliefs and perspectives change about mental health? And the follow-up to that is, how did it help you as a person? And I think that's important, those two questions based on what we talked about.
I think for me, after going through my journey or beginning the journey, because you never get done with it, I had more grace with myself, and my understanding of mental health was that it's just like my physical health. It's just like my emotional, it's my health. I could put a label on it, but it is my health. Any area in your life where you're not healthy, you can't say you're a whole person. So for me, I looked at mental health as just my health. In the same way that I would take care of other areas of my life or my health or my being, my mental health was also prioritized as well. Now, as a person, it made me a better leader, and I think I spoke about that at the onset of this conversation. To me, the biggest testament of my journey has been employees. When I have one-on-ones and mid-years with them, they tearfully look at me and say, this is the safest place I've ever worked. Now, I just told you what brought me to therapy was a toxic work environment where I did not feel safe as a black man. But it came full circle when a young man about 30 years old looked at me and said, this is the safest place I've ever worked. And you're the first man of color that I've ever worked for. My trauma wasn't in vain. What I went through wasn't in vain. But how I went through it helped somebody else get to the place where they can say, this is the safest place I've ever worked. We had another employee who said, this is the anniversary of my daughter's death. She said that in a meeting, like a staff meeting, and she said, I typically don't come to work, and I'm not trying to bring the mood down, I'm trying to actually let y'all know how grateful I am, because this is the first time in the history of my daughter's death anniversary that I've come to work, because I'd much rather be here with you all, because y'all make me feel safe, you make me feel welcome. Even in my grief, even in, like her daughter was taken from her, murdered, that's traumatic. But she found solace and safety where she worked. How many of us can really say, we punched, some of y'all was like, nah, not that place, right? Think about it. But for me, it's a blessing to have several staff members over just the course of a year say, this is the safest place. So for me, it showed up in my leadership. It showed up in my placemaking, in my way to cultivate a culture that's safe for everybody.
Thank you.
If I'm gonna be truthful, I felt a little uncomfortable. I was looking for my mom and dad, like I had betrayed them when I first came out of therapy. I was looking around like, is somebody gonna come spank me? Because I'm talking about what's going on in this house.
Yeah.
All right, but seriously, it was a bit uncomfortable, but it gave me courage. And as I continued the journey, like this brother said, I began to feel lighter, and I felt free. And this may be a little too much transparency, but I even got to a place where I felt comfortable crying in front of other individuals.
That's right.
Because there was a time where I didn't even feel comfortable doing that. Right? I held in so many tears from manning up, acting like, and boys don't cry. We hear a lot of those messages growing up, right? I understand what you're setting your son up to be as you tell him those things. And I know as I look across this room, most of us probably have sons that are grown men now, and then some of us may have sons as teenagers, but still, think about those messages, because it distorts what manhood actually looks like, right? And I don't believe in generational curses. I believe in being a generational blessing, and that's why I started therapy, because I wanted to change the pattern. I wanted to change the narrative, right? Because I didn't want my son to go through some of the things I went through. I'm not saying I experienced a lot of trauma. I'm not going to sit here and badmouth my parents because I didn't experience a lot of trauma, but there are some things I did experience that could have been done differently or better. That's right. So at the end of the day, it's definitely been a freeing experience. And another thing I want to share is maybe you feel like you don't need therapy, but we all can benefit from therapy. And it's not always about the need. Think about the benefit. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
I would just say this. I found out after going through my crisis in life that I was denying my pain. I was glossed over in the hurts that I felt. And I realized that if I was going to stay well and keep on recovery, I had to acknowledge my own pain and not gloss over the things that I was experiencing in life. And what it taught me, very briefly, is that I need to pamper me. I need to take care of me. I love reading. I love listening to blues and rock and jazz. And so I got to do some of the things that make me happy and that give me a release so that everything isn't work and everything isn't taking care of somebody else. And to pamper myself lets me know that I too am important in this life. And as I started to do that, I started to spend more and more time taking care of myself and reaching out to help other people when I can. Like I reach out for the food bank twice a month to help give people that don't have food and resources food. I teach a Bible study every Wednesday, but I leave enough time in my week that I can spend 2 or 3 days at that house, listening to the music I love, reading the books that I enjoy. And I have 2 friends that I have never in the last 15 years spent a day with talking to my friends. And the reason I talk to them, they tell me the truth. They tell me when I'm lying to myself. And they tell me that if you're going to keep from slipping back into that depression and all that anxiety and everything, you got to be up front. And you can't walk around in a facade. And that has helped me more than anything else I've experienced.
Thank you.
And I'm of the nature of listening to my elders. And when my elders tell me, and they're transparent with their story, it lets me know I'm on track.
Yeah.
Because I got a line brother I talk to every morning. Every morning. Now, we're both succeeding in our own ways, but we're the only ones that can tell ourselves the truth to our faces.
Yeah.
And to encourage ourselves not to go back. So, to your point, who do you talk to that may not be in your household, but that will tell you the unadulterated truth to your face? And you don't get in your feelings because you know they right. Because they know you, right?
They know you.
But it's so important for black men to have that counterpoint in one another, to be able to trust someone enough to talk to them every morning and say, how you doing? To talk about your therapy session. How did it challenge you? That's what me and my line brother talk about. Now, in college it was different. Right. But we always talked about the stories. Now the stories are different, right? But at the same time, we still are there for each other, and we still have those touch points for one another. But again, we have that historical knowledge. My therapist even told me, like, look, the same transparency you have with him, you might want to try that with the women in your life. Right. Maybe you, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. You might be on to something, right? Because what the situation is this. He knows me. And my therapist says, what price did he pay for that transparency? That's a question he asked me 3 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to figure it out because I got to talk to him Monday. But what price did people in your life pay for them to be on the top of your call log and your text log all the time? What price did they pay for your transparency and vice versa? And then how many people are in your call log or your text log that you know lying to you, but they still on your line?
Last question for the panel, and then I'll yield the last 5 minutes to you to ask questions here. So as we wrap up here, how can the community, all of us in this room, the places we live, the schools, the places we work, encourage African-American men to feel comfortable to have a conversation about mental health and be open to seeking mental health resources for themselves and their families? That's the last question.
I would change your mindset of how you look at black men. What you think you know about black men. Consider for a moment there's a lot more to learn. Divorce yourself from your biases and what your people taught you, and pay attention to what you see and what you hear. Biggest thing is ask questions. Don't assume. Don't assume. Like this brother said, poke. Ask. If you want to know, ask.
Well, pretty much shared everything I had. But I will say, just continue to encourage, and also don't be afraid to share your story.
Yeah.
Some of us in here may be in therapy, we may be on a self-healing journey. Don't be afraid to be transparent and to share what that looks like to them. Because a lot of times they just want to be able to relate. We just want to be able to have someone to relate to, because we feel like nobody relates to us. And again, just try to close the gap. Have a conversation. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
That's it.
Dan?
I've just found the most important thing is to stop lying to yourself about your feelings. When people ask you how you're feeling, just express what's going on inside of you. Don't try to put up a facade that everything is okay.
That's right.
Because the only person you're hurting is yourself.
Right.
And you can extend that, as he was talking about community, you're hurting the other people in your community. Your wife, your kids, your brothers, your sisters, the whole gamut around you when you lie to people about your feelings. If you don't love someone, say, I'm not in love with you. you might want something they have, but if you're not honest with them, you don't give them the choice of giving whatever they have to you freely. And when you lie to people, in the end, it comes back to bite you.
You might be on to something.
Yeah.
You might be on to something, man.
Say it with your hands like that.
I think I'm gonna pause there and open it up to you.
I'm afraid.
Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left, and so we're gonna open it up to the floor, okay? Ma'am, and then I'm gonna come to you, okay?
I just want to say to him, they say the truth shall set you free.
Amen.
It will.
Ma'am,
First of all, I want to commend you all for being on this panel, because I love to see Black men sharing their truth. So I lost my son to violence, and so we started a foundation. And my question to you is, we do healing retreats for families and focus, because we know men won't go unless their lives will make them, typically. And so, but when they get there, these men are transformed. I mean, they open up, they jump rope. I mean, it's just a whole thing. But my question to you all is, how can we capture that on a more regular basis, like in the States? Like, would men do a men's retreat? I mean, what do men do that they like? I mean, I have a husband, but he's always like, oh, well, we don't do that kind of stuff. So like, we'll do a retreat forever. Women love to commune together.
Well, honestly, like we're here, it's all about changing the mindset. It kills me a lot of times when I hear what men say what men don't do, right? Because to some degree, you're limiting yourself. I go to a retreat because anything that's going to improve who I am and what I'm about, I'm all about, right? And it's about taking that step. And so if you have a retreat and you want men to show up, let me know. I'll be there, with or without my wife. You know, and I don't say that against my wife. It's just because our child situation right now, the way that works is one of us is always on duty, right? So don't misunderstand, you know. But yeah, so if she can come, if we can come with the kids and everything, we'll all be there. If not, one of us have to stay back, right? Yes, definitely invite me. You know, if you need more men presence, definitely. Because at the end of the day, men do retreats, right? Because where our women are, we are. Right? So if that's not happening, then question what are they really about? Because we're about our women, well, we should be about our women and our families.
Well, let me clarify. The retreats are for families who've lost loved ones at the hands of another. So
Okay.
it's a very heavy retreat.
Right.
So
Yes,
men
ma'am.
don't often want to talk about that type of grief, because they're still trying to figure out, do I want to kill the person that killed my child?
Right.
Or what am I going to do? So they have to work through that during this retreat.
And I think in situations like that, it's a flip side to that too. Men will be more open when it's just men. Because the people we have to be strong for are the women. Because now it's a cool pose. But when we divorce ourselves from the disease to please, and we can just be us, that's a lot simpler. However, everybody can't do that. But what I found is when men get together and just do common things, we can be watching a game and that turned into a therapy session. Seriously.
If somebody's bold enough to start it.
If somebody's bold enough to start the conversation, and what it starts with is me too. Me too. It doesn't have to be something contrived. Men can go fishing, and then that's the conversation that gets started. I learned a lot as a young guy being in the midst of guys, and it wasn't no retreat. It wasn't nothing organized, but I learned so much. Barbershops. I learned it at the bar. I learned a lot at the bar. But
Some of that's toxic.
yeah, some of it's toxic too. And growing up in a barbershop, it was 50-50. 50-50. I'm gonna tell you, because it's like, okay, you hear about the escapades, let's be clear. But also when I wasn't doing right, and I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do in school, or I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do in the community, it was that barber like, you know what's better than that, right? So stop it. Like, for me, that pop on the head was some accountability to me, because I couldn't come up in that barbershop the next time without offering up a report. You feel what I'm saying? But again, you have to take the good with the not so good. But at the same time, with men, you have to be organic in a way. And I see a lot of women who won't, well, I want my man to talk, I want them to do this. Well, if you don't divorce them from their ability to choose, maybe they choose more. Don't choose for me. I had to have a real, I'm serious, I had to have a real conversation with my mother. She said, well, your dad, you know how your dad is? Your dad? And I said, well, Mom, if you give him a chance, then you give me and my brother a chance. What are you talking about? Because you always did for, spoke for, felt like you needed to do, because your mother needed to do, I never saw my dad do. So when it was my turn to do, I didn't have a rubric to look at. Does that make sense? I wasn't blaming my mother, but I was just identifying the source. But because of how my mother ended that relationship, she felt like she had to do everything. But what that results is in a man that doesn't know or have the confidence that he can do anything. So now he would do something and look to you. But you want this tough man that you didn't cultivate. Trust and silence cultivate sometimes. And last thing I'll say, I used to teach young men and women how to do the waltz, right? It's a man has a job and a woman has a job in that dance, right? One leads, one follows. And you know who was better? The woman was always better. And they say, Mr. Man, I mean, they making me look bad. I said, no, baby, you making you look bad. If you just don't go with it, see, you got to know what to do. And as we began to work, I saw that young lady begin to whisper to that young man, go this way, go this way, go this way. To the point where now when they're ready for the show, they just seamlessly gliding, but I know they're struggling. Because he's listening to her, but he is leading though. Y'all feel what I'm saying? And I said, the skill for you young ladies is to understand, you know how to do it. But how do you do it to where now as a unit, y'all look in sync? I'm only knowing he's stepping on your foot when you yell, ouch. That's between you and him. You make it our business, and now as your instructor, I look bad on show day, and I don't want to look bad, so get yourself together. And then I would have a conversation with the young man, a box ain't that hard. If you don't want to step on her nice dress and it's flowing and her heels, and it's hard enough for her to do this in flats, and now she got to put on heels, you have a responsibility not to make her look bad. This debutante ball is not for you, it's for who? Her. So you have to lead and know what you're doing. So then I would see the young man practice by themselves because they realized they had a job to do. When men begin to put into practice what you want to see, they perfect what you get. Straight up.
I would just say to you, each one of you in here, that what we're talking about are anecdotal things. I stumbled into therapy. I had no idea what I was getting into. Some of the other people hurt so bad that they were pushed in to get some relief. How do we do that so that it affects the whole community? We have to plan, we have to be intentional, and then we have to invite other people in. One of the institutions that we have, and we're not utilizing it because, I hate to say this, a lot of the ministers are afraid to lose their power. I'm a minister, but I tell my senior pastor all the time, we need to be educating these youth right now. And we need to have them in settings where they are allowed to express themselves other than the drugs and the bullying and the guns and that type of thing out in the streets. Because if you plan it, you have a chance to affect the whole institution.
That's right.
But if it's just haphazardly, like it happened to me and other people that I have talked to, it means that you're gonna get a scattergun effect, and the whole community will be eventually left out of it. Go ahead.
No, this is good. Thank you. We're out of time. You know, we can go and act for another hour. I think we could go for another hour, but we're out of time. So the other thing that I want to leave with you is we got to escape. Where are our inject points? We've talked about a lot here, so I like to call them ink spots in milk. So where do we get started? And we have to go to places, the schools, the playgrounds, the workplace. Parents, you play a huge role in this for our younger ones coming up. And it's not just the boys, it's the girls and our young ladies as well. If you look in this room, who's in here? because you want to get an understanding. And so it has to be at every single level. So we got to go with the inject points to the roots. No shame, you didn't cause it. And we got to call out people who degraded. You got to have the courage to call folks out. Hey, that was not nice. That's how we stop this stigma. And change the language. How we communicate. The words that we use. It's like a crack in the windshield. Small crack. If you don't fix it, guess what? It's going to shatter at some point.
Yep.
And so, in our faith communities. So it's the entire community, we got to start sprinkling these ink spots in the milk. That's right. And you're part of that by being in here today. So I thank you for coming in here, and I want to thank the panel and hope you enjoyed our presentation.